The security badge reader beeped green for the last time at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small could mark the exact moment your entire professional life splits in two. That sound used to mean nothing to me. For 11 years, it was just a noise, part of the rhythm of arriving, like the elevator ding or the sound of the coffee machine in the third-floor break room. But on that particular Tuesday in March, I stood in the lobby for a second after the turnstile opened, and I thought, this is the last time this badge works. I didn't know that yet. I just felt it. The way you sometimes feel the temperature drop before the rain actually hits. I was the director of financial compliance at a mid-sized logistics firm based in Charlotte. We moved freight, managed third-party carrier contracts, and had just started expanding into last-mile delivery for two major retail clients. Revenue was climbing, headcount was growing. And somewhere in the middle of all that growth, someone made a decision that I was never supposed to find out about. I found out anyway. That's the job. My name is Nora. And no, I'm not giving you my last name. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I had spent the better part of a decade being very, very good at a job that most people don't fully understand. Compliance isn't legal. It's not audit, exactly. It sits in the space between the two, watching for the moments when the gap between what a company says it does and what it actually does starts to widen. My job was to close that gap, or at minimum, to document it loudly enough that the right people couldn't claim they didn't know. The problem I would learn was that the right people already knew. It started with a carrier payment discrepancy I found in late October. A third-party trucking company out of Tennessee, I'll call them Route 7, had been billing us for lane runs that our GPS tracking data showed were never completed. Not sometimes, consistently, every week for 14 months. The total, by the time I ran the full reconciliation, was just over $2.3 million. That's not a rounding error. That's not a billing glitch. That's a decision someone made, and then made again, every single week, for over a year. I put together a preliminary report and brought it to my direct manager. I called him my director, on a Wednesday afternoon. He read it quietly. He was the kind of man who kept his face very still when he was processing something uncomfortable. He had a habit of clicking his pen without realizing he was doing it. He clicked it 4 times while he read my summary page. "Leave this with me," he said. I left it with him. 2 weeks passed. I followed up. He told me legal was reviewing it. I asked which attorney. He gave me a name. I sent that attorney an email. She replied 3 days later saying she hadn't received anything from my director yet, but would loop in once she did. I started keeping a separate folder on my personal laptop, just in case. By December, I had followed up 6 times through official channels. I had a paper trail of every email, every meeting request, every response. The preliminary report had gone from a flag to a formal memo. I had escalated to my director, to legal, and carefully, in writing, to the Chief Financial Officer's office. The CFO's assistant acknowledged receipt. That was it. What I didn't know at the time was that Route 7 was owned, through 2 holding companies, by the brother-in-law of our CEO. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I just knew that nobody was doing anything, and the payments were still going out, and I was starting to feel a specific kind of dread that I'd only felt once before in my career. The dread of being the only person in the room who is not pretending. January came. I escalated formally to the board's Audit Committee, which I had the right to do under our internal compliance charter. I put it in writing. I cited the specific dollar amounts, the specific data range, the specific area. I referenced the sections of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that I believed were implicated. I was not dramatic. I was not accusatory. I was precise. 3 days after I sent that memo, my director called me into a conference room and told me the company was restructuring the compliance function and my role was being eliminated. He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. I remember looking at the folder and then looking at him, and the thing I felt wasn't panic or rage. It was clarity. A cold, quiet kind of clarity. Like when fog lifts off a highway and you can suddenly see exactly how far ahead the road goes. I had known this was possible. I had spent weeks thinking about what I would do if it happened. So I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I didn't ask him if he was serious. I picked up the folder without opening it, thanked him for his time, and walked back to my desk. My computer access was already suspended. I had 3 minutes to collect personal items before HR arrived to escort me out. In the hallway on the way to my desk, a woman from accounting caught my eye. We weren't close friends, but we'd eaten lunch together a handful of times over the years. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the careful, blank face of someone who knows exactly what's happening and is terrified of being associated with it. I gave her a small nod. She looked away. At my desk, I picked up a small succulent I'd brought from home when I started, a sticky notepad with my daughter's handwriting on it from when she'd visited once and drawn me a picture, and a travel mug. That was it. 3 things. 11 years in a building, and what you can carry out in your hands in 3 minutes is 3 things. The HR coordinator. I'll call her by her role because she was genuinely just doing what she'd been told, walked me to the elevator. She handed me a pamphlet about Cobra coverage. She said my final paycheck would arrive by direct deposit within 72 hours and that any personal items still at my desk could be mailed to my home address. I'd like to collect them myself, I said. We can arrange that, she said, in a tone that made it clear they would not be arranging that. I thought about my blood pressure medication in my desk drawer. The prescription I hadn't yet picked up from the pharmacy, the one I'd been meaning to grab for a week. I thought about whether I should mention it. I decided not to. Not yet. The badge reader beeped once when I scanned out. I don't know what color it turned. I didn't look back. In the elevator down, alone, I finally opened the folder. There was a separation agreement, a non-disparagement clause, and a non-disclosure agreement. The NDA had a duration clause of 6 months from the date of separation. 6 months. After that, I was free to discuss the circumstances of my departure, the nature of my work, and anything I had observed in my professional capacity, provided it did not constitute disclosure of genuinely proprietary trade secrets. There were no trade secrets in what I had found. There was fraud. Fraud and trade secrets are not the same thing, and an NDA cannot legally protect one by dressing it as the other. I had not gone to law school, but I had worked closely with enough attorneys over 11 years to know that much. I also knew something else. Route 7 was not the only issue in my files. Over the course of my investigation, I had found 2 additional irregularities, one involving carrier insurance certificates that appeared to have been backdated, and one involving a fuel surcharge reimbursement that had been double-billed to one of our major retail clients for at least 8 months. That client was a publicly traded company. That made it a securities matter. I had documented everything, all of it. The Route 7 payments, the insurance certificates, the double billing. I had dated records, time-stamped exports, email chains, and a reconciliation spreadsheet so detailed that any outside auditor could reconstruct the entire picture in under an afternoon. I had copies of all of it on my personal drive and on an encrypted external hard drive that had been sitting in my car for 6 weeks. The morning after I was terminated, I made an appointment with an employment attorney, not to sue for wrongful termination, though that conversation happened, but to understand exactly what the NDA I'd been handed actually allowed me to do, and when, and to whom. The answer was more useful than I had expected. In brief, I could not publicly discuss the specifics for 6 months. I could not talk to media, post on social, or share documents with outside parties. But I could, at any time, respond to a direct inquiry from a regulatory authority. I could, at any time, report suspected securities violations to the SEC. And I could, after 6 months, communicate directly with any board member in their capacity as a fiduciary. Our board had an upcoming composition change. 2 independent directors were joining at the end of the 6-month period as part of a governance restructuring the company had announced publicly in January, ironically the same week I had filed my Audit Committee memo. New directors, clean eyes, people who had not been in the room when the decisions were made. I noted the date they were scheduled to join, September 12th. My NDA expired September 9th. I set a calendar alert. And then I started writing. Not the email, not yet. I spent the 6 months doing something more methodical than that. I wrote a complete narrative account of everything I had found in plain English with no jargon, no acronyms without explanation, and no assumptions about what the reader already understood. I wrote it the way I wished someone had written the compliance memos that sat ignored in my director's inbox, clearly, directly, and with the human cost attached to every dollar figure. The double-billed fuel surcharges, for example, weren't just a line item. They represented overcharges passed on to the retail client's store-level logistics budget, which meant they ultimately affected inventory timing for distribution centers in 3 states. I spelled that out. I attached the billing records. I showed the math. The backdated insurance certificates weren't just a paperwork problem. They meant that for at least 4 months, our company had been contracting with carriers that did not meet our minimum liability coverage requirements, which created exposure for every load moved during that period. I spelled that out too. And the Route 7 payments, I traced them as far as I legally could. I did not allege what I couldn't prove. I stated what the records showed, $2.3 million in payments over 14 months for services that GPS data indicated were not rendered, to a carrier whose ownership structure I had been unable to fully verify. I included the partial ownership information I had found through public records. I let the facts sit there, quiet and damning, and I did not editorialize. I also included, as an appendix, the complete paper trail of every escalation I had made internally. Every email, every memo, every acknowledgement of receipt, and every non-response, dated, time-stamped, in chronological order. 11 years of doing compliance work correctly, and the most important document I ever produced was the one I wrote after I no longer worked there. The summer was strange. My daughter had just started high school, and I was suddenly, unexpectedly, available. I drove her to soccer practice. I made dinner most nights. I applied for jobs and took 3 interviews and received 2 offers, one of which I didn't accept because something in the back of my mind was waiting: my husband. We've been married for 16 years, and I can tell you that 16 years of marriage is long enough that the person who knows you best is also the person you can hide almost nothing from. Figured out that I was waiting for something before I told him. He didn't push. He just asked one evening in July while we were cleaning up after dinner whether I was okay. Not yet, I said. He handed me the dish towel and didn't ask again. September 9th was a Thursday. I had the document ready. I had reviewed it 3 times. My attorney had reviewed it once, not to approve it, because I wasn't asking for approval, but to confirm that sending it after the NDA expiration was legally protected, which it was, and to confirm that the content I was sending did not cross any lines it wasn't already my right to cross. She said, "Send it, and document the timestamp." At 9:01 a.m. on September 9th, I sent a single PDF to the email addresses of all 12 board members, including the 2 new independent directors who had joined 3 days earlier. The subject line was simple: Q3 Compliance Review. Financial Irregularities, Director of Compliance Findings, October-January. No drama. No, you'll regret this. No, I told you so. Just the document. I know what happened next because one of the new independent directors, a woman who had spent 20 years as a partner at a forensic accounting firm before moving to board work, called me 11 days later. She didn't have to do that. She did it anyway. She told me the board had convened an emergency session within 48 hours of receiving my document. She told me they had retained outside counsel and an independent forensic audit firm. She told me the CEO had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. She told me my former director had resigned. She did not tell me what would happen next because she didn't know yet, but she thanked me. Specifically, she said, "I want you to know that what you documented was thorough, professional, and exactly what a compliance function is supposed to produce. The people who fired you made a significant mistake in thinking a clean desk meant clean hands." I wrote that down afterward. I still have it. 4 months after that call, the company filed an 8K disclosing a material restatement of financial results covering the prior 2 fiscal years. the SEC opened an inquiry. Route 7's largest contracts with the company were terminated. The CEO did not return from administrative leave. I was already working somewhere else by then. A smaller company, a narrower scope, a team that had spent exactly 0 time trying to talk me out of anything. On my first day, my new manager walked me through the compliance charter and asked if I had questions. I had several. He wrote them all down. My old security badge is still in the zipper pocket of a work bag I don't use anymore. I found it a few months ago when I was cleaning out my closet. The photo is from my first year there. I'm younger, my hair is shorter, and I'm smiling the way you smile for ID photos. A little stiff, a little uncertain. I looked at it for a minute and then put it back. Not because it's painful, exactly, but because the weight of it is real, and I think real things deserve a moment before you put them away. 11 years, 6 months of waiting, 1 PDF. Some things you file, some things you send. There's a version of this story where I open that folder in the conference room, read the separation agreement, and sign it the same afternoon, where I go home, spend a few weeks angry, and then quietly move on. That version exists. I've thought about it. It would have been easier in a lot of ways. But I think about what that version costs. Not just to me, to the retail clients who kept getting overbilled, to the carriers who competed honestly for contracts they couldn't win because someone else had a private arrangement, to the next compliance officer who would have walked into that building and inherited a culture where raising a concern meant getting walked out. What I did wasn't brave in the way movies make bravery look. It wasn't a confrontation in a boardroom. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It was quieter and slower than that. It was 11 years of doing the job correctly, followed by 6 months of doing it one more time. Without a salary, without a title, without anyone asking me to. That's the part I want people to understand, because I think we misidentify what integrity actually looks like. It doesn't look like a moment. It looks like a habit. It looks like the choice you make when no one is watching and nothing is guaranteed. I kept my records because that's what you do when you're doing the job right. I escalated in writing because that's what the process required. I didn't delete anything after I was terminated because I knew, not hoped, knew that what I had documented was real, and real things don't become less real because someone decides it's inconvenient for them to exist. That's not a personality trait, that's a decision. And it's one that has to be made over and over, not just once in some defining moment, but every time you write an email instead of making a phone call so there's a record. Every time you ask for confirmation in writing. Every time you feel the social pressure to let something go and you don't let it go. The woman from the forensic accounting firm who called me in September, the new independent director, she didn't thank me for being brave. She thanked me for being thorough. I think about that distinction a lot. Bravery without documentation is just noise. What actually moved the board wasn't that I was willing to speak up. It's that when I did, there was nothing to argue with. Every date, every dollar, every non-response, it was all there. My husband asked me once, during those 6 months of waiting, whether I was sure it was worth it. Not in a discouraging way, he just wanted to know if I'd thought it through. I told him I wasn't doing it because I was sure it would work. I was doing it because not doing it would require me to be someone I didn't want to be. That's the only calculation I know how to make. Not will this go the way I want, because you can't control that. But will I be able to look at the choices I made and know they were the right ones? That one you can control. That one is entirely yours. Nora's badge is still in my bag. I keep it there because I think it's useful to hold on to the weight of something before you decide you're finished with it. Not to dwell. Just to be honest about what it cost and what it was worth, and what you do again, I do it again.